My name is Rowan Hayes. For as long as I can remember, the Pacific Northwest has been my sanctuary. I live in a small coastal city called Port Blossom, a place where the air always smells of salt and damp earth, and the sky is a painter's palette of soft grays and blues. I came here for university, drawn by the quiet beauty and the promise of a life that felt like my own. My degree is in art history, a field my mother once called a pointless indulgence for people with no ambition. For 4 years, I've supported myself by working at a dusty old bookstore downtown and occasionally selling my own small seascape paintings at the weekend market. I've built a quiet world for myself here, a world of books, briny air, and the steady, comforting rhythm of the tides, a world as far away from my childhood as I could get. That world, so carefully constructed, came crashing down on the day that should have been my greatest celebration. I was 3 steps away from shaking Dean Arthur Sterling's hand, the heavy velvet of my graduation gown brushing against my legs. The auditorium of Northwood University was filled with the warm, expectant hum of 1,000 quiet conversations and the rustle of programs. The air was thick with the scent of lilies from the stage decorations and the collective pride of hundreds of families. Then, a single voice, sharp and cold as a shard of glass, cut through it all. "She's a fraud." The voice was my mother's. I didn't have to see her to know. It was a voice that had been the soundtrack to every failure and doubt of my young life. The gentle applause for the graduate ahead of me died instantly. A wave of silence rippled through the hall, followed by a confused murmur. I froze, my diploma, a rolled-up scroll of parchment tied with a crimson ribbon, suddenly feeling impossibly far away in the dean's hand. "She cheated her way through this whole university," my mother, Isabel, screamed. She was standing now alone, rigid figure in the sea of seated guests. Her voice, honed by years of commanding attention, needed no microphone. It filled every corner of the vast space. Ask her how she really paid her tuition after I cut her off. Ask her about the favors she did. My breath hitched. The world narrowed to the polished stage beneath my feet and the hundreds of pairs of eyes turning from my mother to me, then back again. I could feel their collective gaze like a physical weight. I saw my roommate Zoe, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Beside her, her kind parents looked deeply uncomfortable, their smiles from moments before frozen and forgotten. In the faculty section, Dr. Bennett, my thesis advisor who had spent hours guiding me through medieval iconography, slowly shook her head, a look of profound sorrow on her face. The lies were so potent because they were laced with a sliver of truth. She had cut me off. When I was 18 and refused to enroll in a business program she'd chosen for me, she had packed my bags herself and told me that if I wanted to waste my life on paint and poetry, I could do it on my own dime. She had never, not once, mentioned the inheritance my grandfather had left for me. A security guard, a burly man with a kind but weary face, began moving down the aisle toward her. A professor from the engineering department stood up and pleaded, "Ma'am, please, this is not the time." "Don't you tell me about time," she retorted, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. I have been silent for 4 years while she paraded around this town pretending to be some kind of independent little scholar. She never earned a thing in her life. It was all handed to her, and when it wasn't, she found other ways to get it. The shame that coiled in my gut was an old, familiar poison. It was the same shame I felt as a child when she would criticize my clothes in front of my friends, the same humiliation that washed over me when she'd belittled my dreams at family gatherings. For years, her words had been my cage. But as I stood there under the hot stage lights, something new began to stir within me. It was a quiet, cold anger, not a fiery rage, but a deep, steadying current of resolve. I was no longer that scared 18-year-old. I had survived. I had worked double shifts at the bookstore, eaten ramen noodles for weeks on end, and studied in the library until closing time. I had built this life, this achievement, not just without her, but in spite of her. She hadn't come here to speak her version of the truth. She had come to steal my joy, to demolish my moment of triumph on the most public stage she could find. I took a deep breath, the scent of lilies suddenly sharp and grounding. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and took the final 3 steps toward the podium. The whispers in the crowd ceased. It was as if the entire auditorium was holding its breath. Dean Sterling's eyes, full of a startling compassion, met mine. "Congratulations, Rowan," he whispered, his voice a low anchor in the chaotic sea of my mother's shouting. He pressed the diploma into my hand. I leaned in close, my own voice surprisingly steady. "Dean Sterling, I apologize for this. I need to speak with you in your office as soon as the ceremony is over. It's complicated, but it's important." He gave a slow, deliberate nod, his expression shifting from concern to a deeper understanding. "My office. In 30 minutes. As I turned and walked across the stage, my mother's tirade continued, her voice growing shriller as the security guards finally reached her. I didn't look back. I descended the stairs at the side of the stage, the heavy scroll of the diploma clutched in my hand. In the corridor, the world was a blur of happy, crying families, of flashing cameras and graduates hugging their proud parents. It was a tableau of everything I had ever yearned for and knew I would never have in the way they did. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my gown. A text from Zoe. "Are you okay?" "I'm so sorry, Rowan. That was monstrous." A message from my study group. "We know who you are. Don't let her get to you." I found an empty classroom overlooking the main quad, the sounds of celebration muted through the thick glass. I sank into a student desk, the plastic cool against my skin. My graduation day was in ruins. My name was now linked to a scandal, my achievements tainted by public accusation. The seeds of doubt my mother had so expertly sown would find fertile ground in the town's gossip mill. But as I sat there, tracing the elegant script of my name on the diploma, a new clarity began to settle over me. My mother had intended to destroy me, but in her desperate, theatrical cruelty, she had made a fatal error. She had performed her final, most vicious act in front of 1,000 witnesses, in front of deans and professors and the very institution she had accused me of defrauding. She had not dragged me down into a private, secret battle. She had, unwittingly, brought her darkness into the light. And in the light, I was no longer alone. Dean Sterling's office was a sanctuary of calm. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather-bound spines glowing in the soft afternoon light. He closed the heavy oak door behind me, shutting out the lingering chaos of the ceremony, and gestured to a worn leather armchair. "Rowan," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "First, I want to assure you that the university does not for a moment credit the accusations made by your mother. Her behavior was abhorrent, and you have our full support." I took a shaky breath, the kindness in his voice nearly undoing the composure I had fought so hard to maintain. "Thank you, Dean. But she wasn't entirely wrong about one thing. This wasn't random. She's been trying to ruin me for months." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" This was it. The moment I had been rehearsing in my mind for weeks. "It started last winter," I began, my voice gaining strength as I laid out the facts. "A check from my student account bounced. When I went to the financial aid office, they told me my account was not only empty, but overdrawn." I recounted the shock of that cold February afternoon. I remembered staring at the clerk's computer screen, my heart pounding in my ears. The account, a trust my grandfather had established for my education, should have had at least $20,000 left. Instead, the balance was negative. The transaction history was a nightmare of withdrawals, large sums transferred to accounts I didn't recognize, stretching back nearly 3 years. My grandfather, before he passed away, left a trust of $85,000 for my college education, I explained to the dean. I was careful with it. I only used what I absolutely needed for tuition, supplementing my living expenses with my job. I thought I was being responsible. "So you suspected foul play?" he asked, leaning forward. I knew, deep down, it had to be her. But I needed proof. I told him how I had used the small emergency fund I'd saved from selling my paintings to hire a private investigator, a retired police detective named Silas Croft. He was a quiet, methodical man who took my case seriously from the moment I walked into a small, cluttered office above the Salty Spoon Diner. Within a month, Silas had unearthed a devastating paper trail. My mother had been intercepting my bank statements, I said, my voice flat with the remembered shock. She had them rerouted to her address. She learned to forge my signature perfectly. Silas found notebooks of hers filled with pages where she'd practiced writing my name over and over again. The dean's expression hardened. This was no longer a matter of family drama. It was a cold, calculated crime. She systematically drained the account. Over $70,000. She moved the money through a series of shell accounts and eventually to an offshore investment portfolio in her name. While she was doing that, I continued, the bitterness rising in my throat. She would call me. She'd tell me how disappointed she was that I was struggling, how a business degree would have given me financial security. She lectured me on fiscal responsibility while she was stealing my inheritance. I pulled out my phone. I started recording our calls. I played him a short clip from a conversation a month before graduation. Rowan, darling, my mother's voice, syrupy and false, filled the quiet office. I do worry about you. All that hard work for a degree that will barely pay your rent. If you'd just listened to me, you wouldn't have to live like a little church mouse. I stopped the recording. That call was made a week after she used my money to buy a new luxury sedan. Dean Sterling sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. He was silent for a long time, the weight of my story settling in the room. Rowan, this is a profound and criminal betrayal. Have you spoken to the authorities? Not yet. I wanted to have everything. The full picture. I looked him directly in the eye. She didn't just steal my money, Dean Sterling. She tried to steal my future. Today, in front of everyone, she tried to steal my past, to rewrite my 4 years of hard work as a lie. She wanted to leave me with nothing. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, the last of the graduates were taking photos on the lawn, their laughter a faint, happy echo. What do you intend to do? He asked quietly. A calm I hadn't felt in months washed over me. The path forward was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. I'm going to make sure she's held accountable, I said. Not just for me. For my brother. And for anyone else she's ever harmed with her lies. My voice didn't waver. But I can't do it alone. I'll need witnesses to what happened today. People of standing. People like you. He held my gaze, and in his eyes I saw not pity, but respect. You will have my full cooperation, Rowan. Whatever you need. The next morning, I sat across a sleek, modern desk from Veronica Blake, a lawyer whose name Silas had given me. She was a woman in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of unshakable competence. She listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, spreading copies of Silas's report across her desk, the bank statements, the handwriting analysis, the transcripts of the recorded calls. When I finished, she looked at the file, then at me. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of familial financial abuse I've ever seen, she said, her tone crisp and professional. Your mother has engaged in identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery. We have more than enough to proceed. Signing the retainer felt like stepping off a cliff, a deliberate leap into an unknown, frightening future. The process server will deliver the summons this afternoon, Veronica said. Are you prepared for her reaction? I nodded, though a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I think so. My mother's call came at 4:15 p.m. I let it ring twice before answering, putting it on speakerphone as Veronica had instructed. What in God's name have you done? Isabel's voice was a high-pitched shriek of panic and fury. A man just came to my door. He handed me court papers. I'm suing you for the money you stole from my grandfather's trust, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Stole, she sputtered. How dare you? That was family money. I was managing it for you, protecting you from your own irresponsibility. Veronica caught my eye and gave a slight, encouraging nod. Her admission was a gift. You call moving nearly $72,000 to an offshore account, managing it? I countered, sticking to the facts. While I was working 2 jobs to pay my rent, you were taking trips to Europe and renovating your kitchen. A beat of stunned silence. Then her voice shifted, dropping into a low, manipulative purr that I knew all too well. Rowan, honey, you're overwrought. This is just a misunderstanding. We're family. We don't need lawyers and courts. Come over for dinner. We'll talk this through, just the two of us. Veronica shook her head, her expression firm. The time for talking is over, Mom, I said, my voice hardening. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I ended the call and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The lawsuit sent tremors through the quiet social circles of Port Blossom. My mother had carefully curated an image as a charitable community pillar. Within days, the cracks in that facade began to show. The first call was from Eleanor, a woman from my mother's bridge club. We met for coffee at a small cafe by the harbor. Rowan, I need you to know, Eleanor began, her hands nervously twisting a napkin. Your mother has a problem. A gambling problem. She explained that for years, Isabel had been organizing fun bus trips to a casino across the state line. But it wasn't just for fun. She was constantly borrowing money from the other women, always with a dramatic story, a sudden medical bill, a home repair emergency. She borrowed $5,000 from me last year for what she said was a down payment for your grad school applications, Eleanor whispered, her face pale. I never saw a cent of it back. My stomach turned. It wasn't just my money. She had been preying on her friends, using my name and my supposed needs as a cover. The hardest conversation was with my younger brother, Finn. He was 22, a gentle soul who worked at a local boatyard and had always been shielded by my mother, her golden child. I found him at his small apartment above a garage, the air smelling of oil and sawdust. Mom said you're trying to ruin her, he said, his expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. He didn't invite me in. Finn, can I just show you something? I asked gently. I spread the documents on his small kitchen table. I watched his face as he scanned the bank statements, his finger tracing the long list of withdrawals from the trust fund. He saw the dates, the amounts, the transfers to accounts with my mother's name. She told me, she said your money ran out because you were being reckless, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She said you were always calling her, asking for a handout. I never asked her for anything, Finn, I said softly. She was telling you I was irresponsible while she was stealing the money our grandfather left for us. He sank onto a chair, the color draining from his face. What about my fund? My heart ached for him. I showed him the other file. His trust had also been emptied. It had been a smaller amount to begin with, as my mother had been dipping into it for years, claiming it was for his expenses. The university he'd dreamed of attending, the one she'd claimed they couldn't possibly afford, had been well within reach. He had just stared at the papers, his illusion of our mother's sacrifice shattering before his eyes. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle came from my Aunt Miriam, my mother's estranged younger sister. She called me late one night after hearing about the lawsuit from a cousin. Rowan, there's something I should have told you years ago, she said, her voice heavy with regret. When your grandmother Ivy passed away, she didn't just leave the trusts. She left the house to both you and Finn to be signed over on your 20th birthdays. Your mother was the executor. She sold the house a year later and told everyone the market had crashed and there was nothing left after the mortgage was paid. But the house was paid off, I whispered, remembering my grandmother proudly burning the mortgage papers at a family barbecue. Exactly, Miriam said. She forged the documents. She stole your inheritance, Rowan. Not just the education money. She stole your home. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it left me breathless. It was a bottomless pit of deceit. A few weeks later, the pressure finally caused Isabel to break. She showed up at my small rented cottage on a quiet, tree-lined street. I heard her shouting from the sidewalk. Rowan, I know you're in there. You have to stop this madness. I watched from my window as she paced, her movements frantic. My neighbors peered out from their porches. You are destroying this family. You are destroying my life, my reputation. For what? For money, she shrieked, her voice cracking. She ran up my porch steps and began pounding on the door. Open this door. I am your mother. You owe me your respect. The desperation in her voice was raw, primal. This wasn't the calculating, controlled woman I knew. This was someone who had lost her grip, whose carefully constructed world was imploding. Then, her fury dissolved. She sank onto my porch steps, her body racked with shuddering sobs. It was the first time I had ever seen her completely undone, not as a powerful matriarch, but as a broken woman drowning in the consequences of her own actions. I didn't open the door. I just watched until she finally stumbled back to her car and drove away, leaving only silence and the uncomfortable stares of my neighbors behind. The final hearing took place on a crisp October morning. The courtroom was small and formal, smelling of old paper and wood polish. Finn sat behind me, his hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. Aunt Miriam was there, and even Eleanor from the bridge club. My mother sat across the aisle, looking diminished. The expensive clothes and perfectly coiffed hair were gone, replaced by a simple gray dress and a pale, drawn face. She wouldn't look at me. The evidence was presented clinically and methodically by Veronica. The handwriting expert detailed the forgeries. A forensic accountant traced the labyrinthine path of the money from my grandfather's trust to my mother's offshore accounts, and then to luxury car dealerships and European travel agencies. He detailed the sale of my grandmother's house and the subsequent disappearance of the proceeds. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Donovan, listened intently. When all the evidence had been presented, she looked directly at my mother. "Isabel Hayes," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The evidence before this court paints a picture not of a misunderstanding, but of a calculated, multi-year campaign of fraud and deception against your own children. You violated their trust, you stole their inheritance, and you manipulated everyone around you to conceal your actions." A choked sob escaped my mother's lips. "This court orders you to repay the full amount of the stolen funds, totaling $284,000, the judge continued. "Furthermore, given the malicious and deliberate nature of the fraud, I am awarding punitive damages in the amount of $200,000. All legal fees will also be your responsibility." The gavel fell with a sharp, final crack. It was over. My mother completely collapsed, folding in on herself in a fit of hysterical weeping. As Veronica guided me out a side door to avoid the local news reporters who had gathered, I felt no elation, no thrill of victory. All I felt was a vast, hollow emptiness. The battle was won, but the war had cost me the last remnants of the family I once thought I had. 3 weeks after the verdict, a letter arrived. It was from my Aunt Miriam. Inside was a small, velvet jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother, Ivy. Tucked beneath the worn lining, I found a faded envelope with my name written in her elegant, looping script. "My dearest Rowan," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I fear your mother has not honored my wishes. I left you and your brother enough to be free, to choose your own paths without fear. She was always so afraid of you finding your own wings, my little bird. I hope that, whatever has happened, you have found your strength. Use your gifts. Don't let anyone's bitterness dim your light. Build something beautiful." Tears I hadn't shed through the entire ordeal now streamed down my face. It was a voice from the past, a final gift of love and validation. My grandmother had seen me. She had known. That afternoon, I called Veronica. "I want to set up a foundation," I told her. The Willow Creek Foundation, named for the small stream that ran behind my grandmother's house, was established 6 months later. Funded by the settlement money, it would provide an annual scholarship to a young woman from a low-income or unsupportive family background pursuing a degree in the arts or humanities at Northwood University. My mother's attempts to contact me faded over time. Finn told me she had sold her house to pay the judgment and was living in a small apartment, working as a cashier. He said she sometimes wrote letters, filled with rambling justifications and half-hearted apologies. I never read them. Some things, once broken, cannot be mended. Forgiveness might be possible one day, but trust was gone forever. My new life began to take root. I bought a small cottage with a portion of the inheritance money my grandmother had intended for me. It had a porch swing and a wild, overgrown garden with a stubborn old rose bush that reminded me of her. I adopted a lanky, 3-legged golden retriever mix from the local shelter, a gentle soul I named Milo. My spare room became a sun-drenched art studio, filled with the scent of turpentine and oil paints. I started painting again, Not just seascapes, but sprawling, vibrant landscapes full of light and color. The first scholarship ceremony was held in a small, sunny room at the university. The recipient was a brilliant young poet named Layla, a girl who had left an oppressive home situation with nothing but a backpack and a handful of notebooks. As I stood at the podium and looked at her bright, hopeful face, I felt my grandmother's presence beside me. This foundation is built on the belief that a person's potential should never be limited by the circumstances of their birth or the failures of their family, I said, my voice clear and strong. It is about providing the one thing every young artist needs, a room of one's own, and the freedom to create within it. After the ceremony, Layla hugged me, her eyes shining with tears. "You have no idea what this means," she whispered. "Someone believes in me." Driving home that evening with Milo's warm head resting on the passenger seat beside me, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I wasn't Rowan Hayes, the victim. I wasn't the woman who had been publicly shamed, or the daughter who had sued her own mother. I was just Rowan. A woman who loved the sea and the smell of old books, who found joy in the quiet companionship of a rescue dog and the challenge of a blank canvas. I had taken the wreckage of my past and built something new, something that would grow and blossom long after I was gone. The old rose bush in my garden had produced a single, perfect, cream-colored rose. I snipped it carefully and placed it in a small vase on my windowsill. It was enough. It was everything.